I'm Vicky Linnane and welcome to Embrace Therapy podcast. I am a practicing art therapist based in Ireland. In each episode, I will interview guests from various fields of therapy and well-being with the aim to encourage healing through embracing therapy. So Sineád Keating joins me today and we are a year on. It's now 2021 and the last time we spoke was September 2020 on the podcast. So a year on into the pandemic, we're checking in with each other now. And Sineád is an amazing advocate and does so much work. You do. Or yes, you do. For mental health and for reducing stigma in the society that we live in right now. I suppose that word stigma is a bit old-fashioned. I think it's outdated now, but you know there is still some around, of course. But I think the work that you're doing is just very important, and it's a privilege to have you on again.
Thank you. That's such a lovely introduction. I'm not very good at thinking the work I do is meaningful, and yet I know it is. So that's lovely and very kind. And we had such a lovely chat last year, and I was in such a strange place because my twins were 4 months. And so, yeah, it's lovely to look back on that and think about where I am now. And it's such a funny time anyway, I think, for everybody, whether it was me having babies or just everybody trying to go about their everyday lives. You said about stigma. Stigma is such not overused. Obviously, it's a really helpful word, but I never really liked it because it's not a feeling word. I think it's difficult for people to get a handle on what stigma means. But it's maybe helpful in the sense that people recognize it. And so maybe in that way, it's an open door to talking about it.
Yeah. And it's a kind of a nice way as well for us as individuals to check in, did I just experience some stigma there? Did I become vulnerable and have the courage to be there and to relay something personal and then be met with stigma?
I used to think about stigma all the time as shame, because that's how I felt about it. And that's really how I've always felt about it. And I have always described it as shame because we all experience shame at some level. So I think that it's more accessible in that way. But I think in the last year, I've come to understand it as shame and discrimination. And I feel the discrimination nature of it. And I have a lot of privilege. So even in situations where I have experienced discrimination, I downplay my own experience because I think I'm so privileged because I'm white and heterosexual and cisgendered and middle class and things that shouldn't be an advantage but are. And I'm really able to speak up for myself. But discrimination maybe plays a more active role in stigma than I had anticipated. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one to navigate. I thought maybe I had done most of the work that I need to do around stigma. It's always an ongoing process, but I thought maybe I'd got a handle on what it was and how it presented in my life. And so to understand it in a new way in the last year is a bit overwhelming, but it's great to feel like I'm always learning, even if it's about the hard stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we need to give ourselves some compassion as well, to think that every day is a learning day, especially with our own processes. Yeah.
Compassion's so hard.
Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah. Self-compassion is so hard. Something that came to me recently is I was listening to Brene, as I always do. I always come back to Brene's, her podcasts and her talks, and they always give me such a lift and I feel really grounded. But she was talking about Kristin Neff's work, and Kristin Neff comes from I think Brene described it as a more mindfulness Buddhist perspective than Brene does, but she talks about self-compassion, and she talked about it as how did she describe it? Allowing yourself to deeply feel what you're feeling, but not to identify with it. Mm-hmm. I have a funny feeling I might have said this on the last podcast. Did I?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, good. I feel parent brain takes over, and I think I said this before, and that really stuck with me because having bipolar disorder is just so, I have so many thoughts and feelings all the time. It's really overloading, and that it's difficult to. I feel like I'm sitting in the middle of a hurricane over my head, and it's difficult to separate myself from that sometimes. And there's a balance to be had between accepting that it's something that's happening to me, and acceptance is a very significant part of how I manage, but also recognizing that it's not me, and that's a difficult balance for me to hold, and I can feel so overloaded by my thoughts and feelings. And when I heard that quote, it just really struck a chord with me, and so I've taken into my day-to-day life a practice about when I notice a very difficult thought or feeling, which in itself is difficult to do, to notice that you're having a thought or feeling. It's a lifetime of work, but to think, do I want to identify, or do I identify with it or not? And I just found it so freeing that I could have a really difficult, particularly around difficult memories, times where I felt really anxious or really shamed, and to think, oh, there that is, but I don't have to identify with it. And it feels like it just passes a bit like a cloud in the sky, and it doesn't feel nice, but it's going to leave.
Yeah, I totally see what you mean. That's something that I really like about Headspace as well, that app, and how they have the visual for that. Obviously, I love having a visual, and I find that one really easy to visualize then, just the clouds drifting away. And similarly, I suppose just giving our thoughts that distance, it kind of makes me think about how our language helps us give distance to living with a disorder like bipolar. So rather than saying, I am bipolar, you might say, I have bipolar.
I don't know when I became very, very aware of making sure I actively said I have bipolar. I was 21 when I got the diagnosis, and I had done mental health volunteering before. So I had some understanding of language and how significant it is. And for me, it's for a long time, I can't pinpoint the moment, but for a long time, I've been very clear on saying I have bipolar rather than I am bipolar. And to me, that's very significant because bipolar is an illness. It's not a personality trait to me. And I think when we ignore the word illness, um, it's like saying it's part of your person, or it's part of your personality or your individuality. And for me, bipolar is not that. It is an illness. It is a terrible illness. I would not wish it on anybody. It's so difficult to live with. And who I am is the person that lives with it, and all the skills and the traits I have that make it possible to live with it, like my courage and my empathy and my gratitude. They're all so important. But I can't pinpoint exactly when I started saying I have bipolar. But also, it's so important for me to remember that for me, that's person first language, but for other people, it's going to be identity first, and they will. Different people will feel it's more appropriate for them to say I am bipolar, and that's always everyone's prerogative to use the language that they feel is best for them about their experience, and this is the language that I use for mine.
I feel like we're really tapping into something now, like, the importance of language. I know, having I'm a follower on your Instagram page.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just think, your advocacy work is really important, and how, you really coined that for me, like that language is important. And I just, I'm really aware of it now myself, as well as a therapist, to know how how much somebody might hang on my words, that they hold a lot of weight in the therapeutic space. But it's not only in that space that I'm a therapist. I have to be seen as that a lot of the time. And I think, like everybody, every day we're learning more and more. And I think that's the beauty of it. But language, just seeing its importance and just how you described it there, and how somebody might not be that person centered, that way when they're saying it. It's experience more, or so yeah, it's just really interesting to think about the power of language, and especially with mental health, mental ill health at the moment. I think so many of us can say that we're touched by the pandemic in that way, that mentally we've struggled. And then it could be just cases of, like, where the language then becomes an issue because they don't know how to talk about it. They don't have the words. And then the language comes into it where, like, maybe it's not appropriate, language as well. So, like,
I don't think that the power of language can ever be underestimated. It is enormous. It's enormously important. It's hugely powerful. And when you were saying about the pandemic, I even from last year, I had a difficulty with the type of language that was being used to describe people's reaction within their mental health to the pandemic, how difficult it was, because I feel in a lot of ways the language around mental health is co-opted to speak about mental wellness. And that's not the same thing. That's not for a minute to say that people, due to the pandemic, are not having difficulties with their mental health, and there's lots of different words that are equally applicable to mental illness as there are to those experiences. But I remember seeing a tweet and it just got under my skin. It was somebody saying we need to open the gyms for people's mental health, and that riled me up the wrong way, because I thought that's the gym and exercise and whatever movement that we each feel is best for us is really important to our mental wellness and maintaining our mental wellness. But that's not the same as talking about mental ill health. You may, and we'll probably all be doing it at the same time. We'll all be managing something that's impacting us negatively to do with our mental health, and at the same time managing our mental wellness. But I do think that there's a difference there. And in terms of me being somebody who has a mental illness, when I see something like that, I think, but exercise is not going to help me when I'm having a hypomanic episode. And I think the language that has been used over the last few years around mental health has just become so broad, and that people with mental illnesses who are on the moderate to severe to profound level are often left out, because they're the people who are, managing maybe suicidal thoughts, or managing being in inpatient treatment, or trying to manage just waking up, maybe not even getting out of bed, literally just waking up. And that's very different to I'm having a tough day, which is not to underestimate having a tough day. It's just different. And I think we need to be mindful of the language that we use. I was thinking then, to saying about stigma, there's a couple of instances that come to mind, but I was thinking just about an experience I had with a professional, with a consultant within the public service. And I was with her for maybe a few minutes. She had my file in front of her, so she knew about my diagnosis and she knew about my treatment plan. She saw details of my inpatient stays, and we were there to talk about me possibly having access to the community mental health nurse, which is a really great support for people within the community. And within 10 minutes, she said, well, you're not going to be suitable for that because their job isn't hand-holding or soothing. And those words had a huge they were hugely significant for me, because even though she wasn't outright saying, "You're exaggerating," or "I don't believe you," it was a very, very subtle way of insinuating that I was exaggerating and that I didn't really need what I was there to say I need. And I find that subtle stigma like that is much more impactful. It's really easy for me to spot obvious stigma a mile away. If somebody's saying something as ridiculous as, well, mental illness doesn't exist, that's really easy for me personally to flag. And then I just don't engage with that person. But to be in a very vulnerable situation with a mental health professional who is saying, well, you're not going to get that because, you don't need your hand held. And on top of that, one of the difficulties I was having, and that presents with bipolar disorder, is emotional dysregulation. And I had also not learned how to not regulate my emotions, but to self-soothe. I was having a lot of difficulty with that. I couldn't validate my emotions, and that was an enormous part of my diagnosis. And even if I had needed hand holding, that would be legitimate.
Oh, absolutely.
That would be okay. That to receive hand holding and soothing in a really dark place is a completely valid thing to need. And so she was doing two things. She was saying that I was exaggerating, and also saying that maybe the thing that I need was ridiculous. I mean, we were there to talk about a service, so there was something actively that could potentially help me. But I think even in situations, and outside professional situations, if you're just with a friend, you don't always have to fix everything, or things maybe can't be fixed. And that's not the job. That's not always our job. That's not what empathy is. Even if you are in a situation where you can offer a certain type of support, empathy has to come first. And empathy isn't about fixing. It's just about holding a safe and compassionate space. And language has a huge part to play in that. And I think some of the most powerful situations I've ever been in is when somebody has said to me, I don't know what to say. And that's lovely. It's much better to say, I don't know what to say, but what can I do? Or I don't know what to say, but I can sit here with you, because that's empathy, rather than things can't be that bad, or just think positively, which are all well-meaning. But there's a huge difference between what you mean and what the impact is of what you say. And so I don't ever think that language can be underestimated in any situation, to do with anything, actually, not even mental health, but around any difficult emotion we will ever feel.
There's an element there about boundaries as well, but when you're going into a service, you don't expect yourself to be needing boundaries up, against kind of language. Like, you kind of go in, you're in a vulnerable place when you need services, and especially for new mothers. I don't know. I just, and right now, with everything on all the access and not having the support of a partner, a birthing partner, because of COVID as well, my heart goes out to everybody who's going through this.
Oh, it's so terrible. I feel so fortunate, and I had a really difficult time when my girls were born, but I know how much smoother my experience was than so many other people who gave birth during the pandemic. People who were experiencing loss, had to get terrible news by themselves. People had to give birth by themselves. Unimaginably difficult situations. I had a really awful experience with my own consultant, and I can't actually really remember when it happened. I can't remember if it had happened last time I was speaking to you. I can't remember who I told when, because it's all just such a blur. And it's interesting now being slightly on the other side, even though I still haven't been 100% well. But I can look back on, because I can look back on a longer space, since my girls are nearly 16 months. Than the last time I spoke to you, there were 4, and we were still very much in that I don't know, it was 4 months technically classed as newborn, but it felt as like the newborn stage. But to look back over the stretch I had with the perinatal mental health services, I had had an experience pretty early on where the psychiatrist told me to let something go. And I thought, oh, if I just let it go, I'd be fine. Actually, there's nothing wrong with me. I'll just let everything go. I'd be grand. I don't need to see you anymore. And that soured my relationship with her completely. And so I couldn't trust her. And I didn't want to share with her the very difficult thoughts that I was having, because once the trust is gone, well, you're not going to want to share difficult things. I feel I can't, because it's a massive risk when you tell your professional something really, really difficult and they chuck it back on you as shame, because that's exactly what it is. I mean, what I'm not sure what she expected me to do with saying let it go, but I got to the girl's first birthday and I was asking to be discharged from the service because it had been so horrific, and was able to go and get private support. And when you were saying just about, of course, when you're going for a service and you don't expect, or hopefully you shouldn't have to expect, to be on the end of horrible language or any shaming comments. But the thing is that with the 2-tier system, you've so little control when you're in the public system. So I didn't even know if I had the ability to say, I don't want to see that consultant anymore. Can I see somebody else? That's not something that was even possible for me to think, because I was so unwell. But I know how fortunate I am to be in the private system and have my private consultant and feel safe with him and trust him. In the public system, it's different. You might not see the same psychiatrist every time. That's an enormous problem. So it's not even that you might be exposed to shaming language, but maybe you're exposed to that multiple times from multiple people. You don't have the option of choosing who to see, choosing who you feel safe with, because even within the difficulty that can come up around language, you're not going to fit everybody as a professional. So the client or the patient needs to have some kind of flexibility to say, with that person, that what they're saying really resonates with me, or I feel really safe with them. And our language can fit with a particular professional and not click with somebody else, and that freedom doesn't exist. And it's so heartbreaking. I hate knowing the amount of privilege I have, and at the same time I feel so lucky that I have it, because I know that it could be so much worse than it has been.
There's something that's kind of flickered a switch in my head. A while ago I was talking to a music therapist who works with Enable Ireland, and he said that they recently changed it from service users to service owners. And I just thought that language shift is so beautiful and so important, and I'm sure it can be felt all the way, trickles all the way down. And just how in the public sector, in perinatal care, that the service user is almost used, like, really is that case of like, you can't build a relationship and rapport with somebody if you've only got like an hour maximum with them. When I'm a therapist, I ask for a minimum of 6 weeks. Luckily I work for myself, so I can say that, in order for a relationship to really blossom and to show and to grow and to build on trust, I really do believe that the minimum is 6 hours with somebody, Yeah, but this whole thing of owning, like service owner, I just thought is so beautiful, because it just gives that power back to them to feel like they own this service, that they get to choose and they have choice and that their voice is warranted.
That's really wonderful. That's a really, really wonderful way of phrasing it. The thing about service user, yeah, I have a slight difficulty usually with it anyway, and yet it's so widely used that when you say service user, like I was saying about stigma, that stigma doesn't really sit with me, but people know it. It's the same with service user. I don't love it, but people will know what I mean. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who's a psychotherapist, and she was saying about how somebody with a lived experience, because they don't necessarily need to be fixed, it's not, well, they never need to be fixed, but you don't even have to necessarily always fix the situation that they're in or fix the health condition that they're experiencing. Maybe it's just part of their life, but that they don't have to engage in a service. Maybe you just hold space for them. Maybe you just provide an area for them, if it's, you know, like a community walk-in centre or something like that, that they can go and just be and engage with things that they like, maybe, or not engage. And that, in order for their experience to be valid and to be recognised and to be supported, it doesn't mean that they have to be a service user, because we don't always have to fix everything. And I think sometimes the health service around mental health care is very much designed around fixing and providing solutions instead of upholding the autonomy of the person with the lived experience and supporting them as they figure out how they want to live and how they find it best to manage their own mental health condition. And it's so centered often around the professional, and professionals are so important. But that's why I love the term expert by experience, so that I know that when I'm in a situation with my consultant, he's the professional and I'm the expert. And so that there is some kind of parity there, that I have the lead and he's there to guide me and to support me. And I wish everyone were like him. He's so fantastic, but unfortunately that's just not the system that we have. And you can't have that system when you're seeing a different consultant every time. And so the public service is just so broken. It's really sad.
This, like, that whole idea of resolution, like, and solution, like solution focused kind of, you know, it just can't be the ultimate goal. Like, it just can't be just that, you know, there has to be more. You know, I don't know where I'm going with that. There has to be more than this.
But how can you be solution focused? I mean, I don't really, I really don't get how, when you go for support for particularly a mental illness, how it's supposed to be solution focused. I don't get that. I'd rung up, I remember the EAP service, because I have access to that through my health insurance and through my work. And I was able to access some therapy sessions because I had a specific issue, which was that I was a new mum. I was finding it really hard. But and this is not necessarily a reflection on their service, they're all people just, you know, trying to do their best work. But they didn't see anybody specifically for the reason of having a mental illness, because this was solution based and it was 6 weeks. And that's not a model that a mental illness can fit into. And there are no public services that I know of that are any more than 6 weeks. I know you can get counselling through primary care after a significant wait, but 6 weeks, like you were saying, is the bare minimum. You have 6 hours and you're really just getting to know somebody then. And maybe if you have a mild to moderate, very specific issue that you need to focus on, maybe that therapy is helpful for you, but it completely cuts out mental illness, which is really, really frustrating, because then you have to find your own private care, and that's not within the grasp of everybody.
Absolutely, and that's where that privilege comes in again that you were bringing up. I was speaking to Liora Soto. She's an Israeli art therapist before, and she was telling me about a friend of hers and how they have been seeing a therapist for years, like years. And the therapist said to her, "Oh, now I'm finally seeing how you are telling me and showing me now how I can help you, and it's like, the person who comes to me, has to show me how I can help them. And how can they know if they're, ruminating around with their anxiety and their intrusive thoughts, and they're in that hyperarousal state? How can you know how I can help? So
Well, you can't.
no, so it's about that holding hands and self-soothing with the person, sitting with them, ride the wave with them, and then when we get to that like that point where we're able to kind of peel back some layers, then the healing can really start. But it's only through their guidance that we can facilitate that change. I don't know.
No, I get it. The framework that we have around accessing different types of therapies is just so rigid. It's not even just about the time, but that solution focus, that we expect people to fit into the system rather than making the system flexible to fit around individuals. It just doesn't make any sense. I have a therapist at the moment who's really wonderful, and we're only maybe 4 sessions in. I think this week is our 4th. And she's so lovely. And as soon as I saw her, I was able to just get straight in to things that I needed to work through. But that, being able to do that, is the result of many, many years of experience, seeing an awful lot of therapists, being very comfortable and confident in how it works. Also being confident in saying this isn't working for me if I had met her and it hadn't worked out. And having that ability to vocalize how I'm feeling, and the fact that I've had the ability to look at my own feelings and sit with them and look at them from different angles. So then by the time I went in to see her, I could tell her all that. But we can't expect everybody to do that. I can't even expect myself to do that all the time. It very much depends on even how I am. Maybe I can't do that when I'm if I'm in a worse place. But and especially with children, how are we supposed to expect children to fit into a system rather than give them space and time just to grow in this environment that we offer them, and just to allow them to flower? If I could fix the health system, there would be so many things I would do. But I think even to be able to acknowledge the flaws that we have, so that, speaking even to somebody on Instagram the other day about a difficult experience they had, and even just to give them the backup and say, that's really not okay, and I'm really sorry that you've had that experience, to be able to validate other people. I know how I feel when other people validate me, and I feel so glad that maybe I can do that sometimes for other people, and that's even a place to start.
Absolutely, to be seen. What a joy it is to be seen. Yeah.
It's what we all want. It's what we all need. I don't know where Oprah says it, but I can hear her voice in my head saying that that's what we all want. Do you see me? Do I matter? Mm-hmm. And that's what we all want to know.
Have you read the book What Happened to You yet?
No, I haven't, and it's on my reading list, but I haven't bought it because I have about 5 books on my nightstand that I haven't been able to read since having children. But I will get to it.
I think you need the Audible book. Just having Oprah in your ear and Bruce Perry as well. Just
do you know, I listened to the episode that they did on Brené's podcast, as a little taster, and I think talking about trauma is so important because I recognize my illness as a trauma, but I think that at some point we all go through trauma, just whether it's like big T trauma or little T trauma. And for me, little T trauma has been so difficult to pinpoint. I always would have felt, oh, I can't call that trauma because, people go through really awful stuff, instead of recognizing that there's space for my, maybe, I love the term little t trauma because it's still trauma. But there's space for that as well as other people's, more intense maybe experiences of trauma. And I think it's something that we don't grow up knowing how significant trauma is on our lives, or how to look out for it. And so, yeah, the podcast was so interesting, and I really can't wait to read the book because I think it will really speak to me.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a beautiful book. And then the work of Gabor Mate, he's doing really lovely things as well about trauma, and he's written loads of books as well, and I think Bessel van der Volk or Vandal Hulk, I always get his name wrong. But he's got a book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is a beautiful book too. And yeah, I think we're really becoming trauma informed. As a society, I think we're becoming a little bit more attuned to that word trauma, and seeing that we can all have many small t traumas in our lives, and that can actually be the things that we're holding on to. And yeah, just like those subtle experiences of stigma and how hard they are to pinpoint. It can be really hard to find all the small t's. But
I would think for me that my experiences of stigma are more traumatic than my experiences of the illness. And the illness is really awful, which would say how terrible stigma is, because it's gaslighting. It really does make me feel, am I overreacting? Am I, making this bigger than it is? Should I let that go? That's how powerful it is. I mean, I love a good quote. And so now the quote that comes to my mind is Maya Angelou, and I'm going to butcher it. I can't even say it verbatim, but she talks about how, words are things. And they get into the carpet, and they get into the furniture, and finally they get into us. And so when we say things to people, it has meaning. And especially if you're in a dynamic with, when there's maybe a child and a parent, or a child and a teacher, or, some dynamic where there's a person of authority and the person who looks up to them. The language you use is just so intensely powerful. And we have to bear that in mind. Yeah, I think about that a lot now as a parent. But even I know we were talking before about Sarah Crosby's book, who is the Mind Geek. If you don't follow her on Instagram, she's fantastic. And she has her book 5 Minute Therapy, and she has a section on reparenting. And my God, it's amazing. I love that. I think maybe I went straight to boundaries, which would be where I would automatically gravitate to, and then I went on to reparenting, and it was such a wonderful healing chapter about how, if you have trauma from childhood, it might not even have been necessarily from childhood, but that's what came to me, that you can give yourself the healing that maybe you should have gotten, in whatever context you missed out on healing, that you can give it to yourself. And maybe that's one of the most powerful lessons I've ever learned, that we can give to ourselves what we didn't get from others, or that we can heal what we did get that we shouldn't have gotten. I really recommend that book. It's so fantastic.
And the two go together really, really beautifully as well. The Oprah book as well, What Happened to You, because there's so much reparenting in that book. There really is. And you kind of touched on something as well that I just wanted to just peg as well, that transactional analysis is something that is something I'm very interested in. I haven't studied it yet, but it's something I'm very aware of now, and how, when you were saying that parent-child dynamic, or the parent-teacher, and when someone's in authority, and that we can check in with ourselves and see what position are we in, even as an adult, in a transaction.
Yes.
communicating. So am I am I currently stepping into my child's shoes now and being met with this adult who's stepping into their authoritative position of being parent? And am I being looked down on now? Am I being talked down on now? And checking in with yourself, and then being able to kind of push yourself back up into adult space and meet
Yeah.
adults, and not be meeting them in this kind of emotional childlike state. And that's damaging. That's, you know.
That understanding the child state and slipping back into it has been so instrumental for me. And I once had a therapist who had recommended, she knew I loved reading, and especially children's books. So I think we talked about how much I'd loved The Wind in the Willows when I was a child. And she said, there's a new book and you can get it on audiobook called Toad Goes to Counselling. And I listened to it, and it's so fabulous. And it's all just Toad has all this stuff from his childhood, and he talks about it with a therapist. And it's great. And when you're listening to something and you have the little, oh, I just got that, as Oprah would say, an aha moment. I had a little aha moment talking about the child state and the adult state, and I realized how much I slip into the child state when I'm not well, or how I jump straight to fear. And I think just having the tools, and so much of it goes back to having the language to describe how I feel to myself before I describe to anybody else. Just having the words within myself to know what's happening to me, how I'm feeling. And when I can put words on, I'm in the child state. Well, I that has a whole lot of meaning to me. So then I can be like, okay, well, maybe this is what I need to do, and I can, focus on this for the moment, and I can park that for the moment, and it just gives me the tools I need maybe to get through a difficult situation or a difficult event or experience. Because I think that for me anyway, having mental illness, there are a few steps to dealing with an episode, if you like. First is getting through the episode. Now there'll have been stuff precipitating, not precipitation, that's not the word at all. There will be stuff preceding that. But I think if I'm having a panic attack, for example, if it feels like it's all starting at the panic attack, so I just take it that it's starting at the panic attack. And the first bit of work is just to get through that. And sometimes if I just think all the time, if I just think I'm having a panic attack, I just have to let it happen. And then when it ends, my next bit of work is that I need to rest, and I need to just park everything and never think of letting stuff go. Even before that consultant said it to me, I don't think that. I just think, can I just set that down for the moment? And then afterwards, I may have a little bit of work to look at what happened. Was there something that was particularly triggering for me? And all through those stages, having the language is so helpful, because when I have the language and I can practice using the language, it's just much easier to cope. And so I think language is just as important for me as it is for and my relationship with myself as it is for me in my relationship with other people.
And there's no better time to start than now. No matter what age you are,
No.
You can have your 4-month-old babies and start to educate by showing different emotions and naming them. That's okay. If you're experiencing the sadness, naming the sadness and saying it's okay, and showing them the way. Even now at 16 months old, showing them all different types of love and care and all the emotions, because we have a massive spectrum of emotions that we all are able to convey. And learning yourself now in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever age you are, there's no better time than now to just start this emotive language and learning a little bit more about yourself. Because just like Hansel and Gretel with the little pebbles, there are pebbles that you have left behind that you can go and retrace back and get a different perspective of what happened to you. And just, it's so important to learn those things now.
I think yeah, just what you're saying. I know that my daughters will pick up so much from me, and I mean, I have cried more times than I can fathom in front of them. And I wonder, are they? Well, they must be now 15 months picking up on it, in some way. And my therapist has said to me recently, have you practiced, not even practiced, but have you done the thing of when you're crying to say to them, mummy's crying and that's okay. We all cry sometimes. And she was saying about meeting them where they are. And I thought, well, that's great. I hadn't even thought of that. And then I realized I had done it unconsciously. I had been like, mummy's crying, but it's okay. I'm fine. You're fine. And that was lovely because it was just as much for me as it was for them. And they will see me ill and they will see me upset, and that is okay. If I can give them the language to understand, and hopefully the language to ask questions, so that they can seek more knowledge from me rather than worrying about me. Or language, it's just so powerful. I come back to it all the time with myself. And something else I had done. See, the thing is, when I started out, I remember wondering how people ever spoke kindly to themselves. I just did not get that. That was such a foreign, far off idea to me, that that must only happen to people who are, not anxious, or I don't know. It was just, I just couldn't fathom who does this, who speaks to themselves kindly. And I thought, well, I'd really like to do that. So maybe I'll just practice. And so the key for me was thinking, yeah, I deserve to speak to myself kindly. So I'm going to figure out if I can. And I just started practicing, and I wasn't able to catch all my horrible comments to myself immediately. But I've spent maybe 3 or 4 years cultivating a kind, compassionate inner voice. And now it is automatic. And it's such a wonderful gift. I can't tell you how grateful I am for it. And I know that it's the result of all the work that I've done to get here. And I think it's just so important to remember, for anybody who's in that position of, how can I don't know how I could speak kindly to myself. It is just a practice. You can cultivate a very clear inner voice that has calm and kindness and empathy, and speaks to you the way that you would speak to a friend. And so much of that, again, is language. Because we all know what we need to hear, whether we acknowledge it or not, or whether we actively engage with it or not. We all know when we're having a really terrible day or a really terrible experience. We know when somebody says something to us that we need to hear. And equally, we know when somebody has said something to us that makes us feel a whole lot worse. And I think that we can get to, if I can, anybody can cultivate a kind voice. If I can, it takes a little bit of work, but it's so worth it. And I think that will make me a better parent, because my inner voice that I speak to myself kindly with is going to be the voice that I speak to my children with. And hopefully that will become their inner voice.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Matryoshka dolls, and how.
Oh yeah.
I love doing Matryoshka dolls in my work. It's something that a lot of our therapists would use, and drama therapists too. But to love all parts of self, and to recognize that even the smallest part of self might not be the part that needs the most protection, but actually the most listening. That is actually the wise part a lot of the time. That those kind of wounded smaller parts, like those vulnerable parts that we maybe protect, are the ones that maybe we need to listen to more and see as the wise parts. Just to love all parts of self, I
think maybe that's why I love Brené's work so much, that your vulnerable self is often the self that we want to go, shh, just don't want to look at you. I don't want to feel you. And I have a friend who talks about how when the shame monster pops up, instead of just saying, shh, go away, say, I see you and I love you. And you can stay in your box, but I see you and I love you. And it's so powerful because all our horrible feelings are the things that that are difficult to come with vulnerability. They are part of us and they come from somewhere.
Absolutely. There's this word that when you say cultivate, like I love that word so much. Like it's one of my highlights on my page, on my Instagram page, cultivate. And I just love it and anything that I find. But this word is not an English word. It's I think it's a Welsh word, and it's CAIM, pronounced Keam, and it means sanctuary, an invisible circle of protection drawn around the body with the hand to remind one of being safe and loved even in the darkest times. So it's like I find trying to find time to practice and cultivate this kind is like self-love. Like it's an invisible circle of protection, around yourself. So
that is so gorgeous,
isn't it? I love that so much.
That is gorgeous.
The Matryoshka dolls, and then this invisible circle of protection and love made by yourself. And that's like ultimately when I'm working with teenagers, this is what I'm trying to tell them all the time, is that like we have many parts. Why don't you love some parts and why do you like the other parts? And kind of stripping it back a little bit and trying to appreciate and find love for all parts of self. That self-compassion and that lovely voice that you can hear, that you're working on at the moment, Sineád, but that kind part as well, that invisible part that you can set up for yourself as well, is a safe sanctuary.
So much of me and the work that I've done on like self-soothing and self-protection and reparenting, what I've had to push through to get to those is getting over the difficulty I had with deserving. And I think that if you are somebody with a mental illness who has gone through all the bureaucratic stuff that comes with accessing the services, well, if you're in a service or you're with a professional or you're with a family member or a friend or somebody who is using language that diminishes your experience in some way, I think the idea of undeserving very, very easily slips within. I think that it can really get under your skin, and we have to get through the deserving, the difficulty around deserving, in order to self-protect and to self-nurture and to cultivate all the things that we want to cultivate for ourselves and have our best relationships and our best lives. We need to recognize that we deserve them, and either we all deserve it or none of us deserve it. And I think we all deserve it. It's not everybody else deserves it, but not me. We all do. And that was key for me. And again, so much that comes down to language, how we communicate with each other, and do we lift each other up or do we tear each other down? And we can also do that with ourselves. But that is just such a beautiful, the visualization of having that protective circle around yourself. That is just so beautiful.
You can take it anywhere with you.
Yeah.
And to say that mantra, I am deserving, it's so beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Sineád.
Oh, thank you.
I love chatting with you.
I love chatting with you. It's so great. And I always feel like I feel like I've been reflecting on myself, but in a, it's always slightly different when you reflect on yourself with somebody rather than by yourself. And it's always just a lovely, healing, warm conversation with you. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. You're so kind.
You're deserving of this time and space.
Thank you. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vicky.